It was a quiet evening at one of the most prestigious concert halls in the city, filled with excited whispers and the soft rustling of programs. The seats were packed and everyone was eagerly waiting for the star of the evening, the famous pianist. Known for his exceptional talent and larger-than-life personality, he had become a regular feature in the world's grandest venues, wowing audiences with his unmatched skill and passion. The stage lights dimmed, and the room went silent as the pianist made his entrance. The soft sound of his footsteps echoed throughout the hall, creating an air of anticipation. Clad in a black tuxedo, he looked every bit the part of a musical genius. With a confident smile and a knowing twinkle in his eye, he took his seat at the grand piano. The audience, some of whom had traveled great distances to see him perform, leaned forward in their seats. This was a moment many had been waiting for, the moment they would witness greatness. The pianist placed his hands gently on the keys and began to play. His fingers moved effortlessly, creating a melody so beautiful it seemed to lift the entire room. The notes flowed like a river, each one perfectly placed, each chord resonating with the power of his experience. The audience was entranced, holding their breath as if afraid to disturb the magic that was unfolding before them. The pianist was a master, and they were all in awe of his artistry. But as the piece reached its peak, something unexpected happened. As the final notes echoed in the hall, the pianist, still seated at the piano, looked out at the audience and saw something that made him smile mischievously. There, in the front row, sat a woman who appeared somewhat out of place. Her clothes were simple, almost ordinary compared to the well-dressed crowd around her. She wasn't the type of person one would expect to see attending such an exclusive event. Her wide eyes were fixed on the pianist, clearly impressed but also slightly nervous, as if she was unsure of what to make of the performance. As the last note rang out, the pianist, with a playful grin, turned his gaze toward her and raised an eyebrow. The audience, who had been following his every move, was now curious, wondering what he would do next. Without missing a beat, he leaned into the microphone and spoke to the crowd, his voice smooth and full of charm. "I see we have an eager audience tonight," he said, his tone teasing. "But I have to ask, what would you all say if I asked this fine lady right here to join me on stage and play a piece herself?" The room went quiet for a moment. A few people exchanged puzzled glances, unsure if the pianist was joking. After all, he was known for his playful nature, but this felt different. The woman in the front row looked taken aback, her cheeks flushing with surprise. She glanced nervously around, unsure whether the invitation was serious or part of the pianist's usual banter. The audience, not knowing how to react, burst into laughter. Some chuckled nervously, while others whispered among themselves. The idea of an untrained person, especially someone with no visible musical background, playing on the same stage as the famous pianist, seemed absurd. They all waited for the punchline, the moment when the pianist would reveal it had all been a joke, but the pianist wasn't finished. He tilted his head slightly, still smiling. "Come on," he said, his voice filled with warmth. "Don't be shy. I promise it'll be fun. What's the worst that could happen?" For a brief moment, the woman hesitated. Her heart raced, and the idea of stepping onto that stage where every eye in the room would be on her terrified her. She had never played in front of such a large crowd before. She wasn't a musician, at least not professionally, and she had no idea how she would handle the pressure. But there was something in the way the pianist spoke, so casually, so confidently, that made her feel a little less intimidated. It almost felt like a dare, one she couldn't refuse. She took a deep breath, her hands shaking slightly as she stood up from her seat. The audience fell into an expectant silence, watching her every move. The pianist, noticing her nerves, gave her a reassuring nod, his eyes soft and encouraging. "It's all in good fun," he said gently. Slowly, she made her way to the stage, her steps tentative but steady. As she reached the piano, she sat down and placed her hands on the keys. The cool surface of the piano seemed to calm her, and for a moment the noise of the audience faded away. She focused on the black and white keys before her, feeling their texture beneath her fingertips. The pianist stood off to the side, watching her carefully. He had no idea what to expect, but part of him couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. This was an unusual moment, something unpredictable, and he was curious to see where it would lead. The woman's fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, unsure of what to play. She had never performed in front of an audience before, let alone one of this size. The pressure was immense, but something inside her told her to go ahead, to trust herself. She had always played for herself in the quiet of her room, letting the music flow freely. But this was different. She took another deep breath and pressed her fingers down. The first note was soft, hesitant, almost as if she was testing the waters. It was nothing like the confident, sweeping melodies the pianist had just played. But as she continued, the music began to grow stronger. Her fingers found a rhythm, and with each note she gained a little more confidence. The melody she played wasn't a complicated one, but it was hers, and that was enough. The audience, initially unsure of what they were witnessing, grew quiet. The room, once filled with nervous laughter and whispers, now held its breath. The woman's playing wasn't perfect, but there was something raw and real about it, something that resonated with the crowd. It was as if they could all feel the vulnerability in her music, the courage it took for her to stand there and play. As the last note of her impromptu performance lingered in the air, the room was still. The pianist, who had been watching her with interest, now stepped forward and applauded. The audience followed suit, their applause slowly growing louder and louder. For a moment, it felt like the entire hall had come together in appreciation of something unexpected, something genuine. The woman looked up, her face flushed with a mixture of relief and surprise. She had done it. She had played, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, it had been, well, something else entirely. A strange sense of pride bubbled inside her as she looked out at the crowd, their faces filled with admiration. The pianist, still smiling, walked over to her. "Well done," he said, his voice sincere. "That was unexpected." She laughed nervously, unsure how to respond. "I didn't know what I was doing," she admitted, her voice still trembling slightly. He chuckled. "It doesn't matter. You played from the heart, and that's what matters." The audience's applause continued, and the woman's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and gratitude. Little did she know this moment, this spontaneous, unexpected moment, was about to change her life forever. The applause gradually faded, but the woman remained at the piano, her hand still resting lightly on the keys. The realization of what had just happened began to sink in. She had performed in front of a full concert hall, something she never thought she would do. A mixture of emotions washed over her, relief, pride, and a bit of disbelief. Her heart was still racing, but now it felt like the adrenaline was giving her a new kind of energy. The crowd's applause had been genuine, but she could hear the uncertainty in her own mind, questioning if they had truly appreciated what she had done, or if it had all been some sort of fluke. The pianist, who had been standing off to the side, approached her slowly. His steps were measured, deliberate, as if he were giving her the space she needed. He had been watching her with interest, though he had no idea how she was feeling. It was clear, however, that he was impressed. She had managed to surprise him, and that wasn't something that happened often. After all, he had performed in front of thousands of people. Yet the sight of this woman, someone who had no intention of being on stage, playing so effortlessly, was something special. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, breaking the silence. His voice wasn't the playful, teasing tone it had been earlier, but rather one filled with genuine curiosity. She turned to face him, still processing the situation. I think so," she said, her voice trembling a little. "That was terrifying." He laughed, the sound warm and comforting. "I can imagine. It's not every day someone gets asked to perform like that." She smiled nervously, unsure of how to respond. "I didn't expect any of this. I thought it was just a joke, but then I was up here and I just played." She let out a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "I didn't even know what to play at first." The pianist's smile softened, his eyes twinkling with understanding. "It was beautiful," he said sincerely. "I don't think anyone expected something so raw, so real. You made something simple feel profound." Her eyes widened slightly at his words. "You really think so?" He nodded. "I do. There's a certain honesty in playing from the heart, especially when you don't know how it's going to turn out. It's a rare thing." The woman felt a warmth in her chest at his praise. She had never thought of herself as a musician, certainly not in the way he was describing. For her, music had always been something personal, a private escape from the world. She had taught herself to play by ear, never taking formal lessons and only ever playing in the quiet of her room. The idea of sharing that with others had never crossed her mind. But in that moment something shifted. Maybe it wasn't just about playing for herself anymore. Maybe it was about sharing what she loved, no matter how imperfect it might seem. "I've never played for anyone before," she confessed. "Not like that. I've only ever played when I'm alone. It's easier that way." He looked at her with a knowing expression. "I understand. But you've got something special. You don't have to be perfect to move people. Sometimes it's the imperfections that make something beautiful." She was quiet for a moment, letting his words sink in. She had never thought about it that way. She had always believed that to perform, to be on stage, you had to be flawless, polished, and confident. But now she was starting to see that maybe it wasn't about perfection at all. Maybe it was about being honest, about showing who you really were through your music. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice filled with gratitude. "That means a lot." The pianist nodded, then turned to face the audience, who were still buzzing with excitement. "You've made quite an impression," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "They're not going to forget this anytime soon." She glanced out at the crowd, still somewhat in awe of the whole situation. The applause had died down, but the energy in the room hadn't. People were talking amongst themselves, their conversations filled with wonder and amazement at what they had just witnessed. Some were still clapping, some were shaking their heads in disbelief, as if they couldn't quite wrap their minds around what had just happened. A few of them even looked at her with admiration, as if they had seen something extraordinary. She hadn't expected this at all. "Maybe it's time to head backstage," the pianist suggested, giving her a friendly smile. "You can relax for a bit and let all this sink in." She nodded, still in a daze, as they both made their way off the stage. As they walked through the backstage area, she could still feel the weight of the crowd's eyes on her. It wasn't a bad feeling, but it was strange. She had never been the center of attention like this. The backstage area, which had seemed so ordinary moments ago, now felt like a different world. She wasn't just another face in the crowd anymore. She was part of something bigger, something that was unfolding right before her eyes. As they reached a quiet corner backstage, the pianist turned to her. "Take a breath," he said gently. "You did something amazing out there. I know it was unexpected, but you handled it like a pro." She let out a deep breath, trying to calm the fluttering in her chest. "I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. I just played. I don't even know what happened." "That's the beauty of it," he replied with a smile. "It was spontaneous. It was real. That's what people connect with. You can't fake something like that." She thought about his words, and for the first time she felt a sense of pride in what she had done. It wasn't about the applause or the spotlight. It was about doing something unexpected, something that came from her heart, and that was something she had never experienced before. The pianist leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "You know," he began thoughtfully, "I've been playing professionally for years, and I've seen a lot of performances. But what you did, what you gave them, was special. It's the kind of thing that makes an impact." She smiled, the warmth from his words filling her up. "I didn't think I was doing anything that special. I was just trying to get through it." He chuckled. "Well, it's clear you've got more to offer than you realize. You've got something that people want to see, something that's real, and that's something that can't be taught." For the first time since she had walked onto the stage, the woman felt a little lighter. There had always been something inside her, something she had kept hidden away. But now, for reasons she couldn't explain, she felt like it was okay to share it with the world. Maybe she didn't need to be perfect. Maybe she didn't even need to be trained. Maybe she just needed to play. As the minutes passed, she began to realize that the night wasn't just about her performance. It was about the possibility of something new. Something that had been locked away for so long, but now had the chance to be set free. "I think you're right," she said softly, meeting his gaze. "Maybe I've been hiding for too long." The pianist smiled knowingly. "I think you're about to step into a whole new world." And as she stood there in the quiet backstage, the weight of his words settled over her. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she was ready to find out. The next few days passed in a blur for the woman. She couldn't seem to shake the feeling that something had changed inside her. It wasn't just the event itself, it was how it had made her see the world differently. Every time she thought about it, she felt a rush of emotions. It was almost like waking up from a dream, not quite sure if it was real, but knowing something had shifted. After the concert, life had gone back to normal. She returned to her usual routine, but it didn't feel the same. Her friends and family had heard the story of her unexpected performance, and their reactions varied. Some were impressed, Others were amazed, but most of them were just as surprised as she was. No one had expected her to be the center of such attention. They all kept telling her how brave she was, how it was such a remarkable thing for someone with no formal training to do. At first, she shrugged it off. It was just a spontaneous moment, something she never planned. But deep down, something inside her had changed. The compliment she'd received from the pianist, the way he had spoken to her, kept playing in her mind. He had said something about honesty and being real in her music, and those words had stuck with her. The way she had played, the way she had allowed herself to be vulnerable, it had connected with the audience in a way she hadn't expected. One evening, as she sat in her living room, sipping tea and listening to some soft music, her phone buzzed. She picked it up and saw a message from an unknown number. At first she hesitated, but then she opened it. The message read, "I hope this finds you well. I'm the pianist from the concert the other night. I wanted to personally reach out to say how much I enjoyed your performance. I believe you have a real gift, and I'd love to talk further about the possibility of working together. Please let me know if you're open to it." She stared at the screen, her heart racing. The pianist? Reaching out to her. The same man who had performed in front of thousands, who had commanded the stage with such power, wanted to work with her. It felt unreal. She had only played for a few minutes, and yet it seemed like he saw something in her that she hadn't seen in herself. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed a response. "Thank you so much for your kind words. I'm flattered by your offer, but I don't know if I'm the right person for something like this. I'm not a professional." The reply came quickly. "It's not about being a professional. It's about having something unique. I saw that in you the other night. You have the ability to connect with an audience in a way that not many people can. That's something you can't learn. It's something you already have." The words hit her hard. She had never thought of herself that way. All her life, she had been too shy to share her music, too afraid that she wasn't good enough. But here was someone who had seen her, truly seen her, and he was telling her that she had something special. It was more than she could have ever expected. The idea of working with someone like him, someone who had so much experience and talent, felt intimidating yet exhilarating. She paused for a long time before responding, weighing her options. Was this something she could actually do? Was it even possible? And more than anything, was she brave enough to take the next step? Finally, she typed, "I'm willing to meet and talk. I don't know where this will lead, but I'd love to learn more." The message went through, and almost instantly he replied with a time and date to meet. She couldn't believe it. Just a few days ago she had been a stranger in the audience, and now she was about to meet the very person who had inspired her to think differently about her music. When the day of their meeting arrived, she felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. She didn't know what to expect, but the idea of working together, of learning from someone with so much experience, filled her with hope. She had no formal training, no knowledge of music theory. She was simply someone who played from the heart. But maybe that was enough. She arrived at the cafe where they had agreed to meet, a small, cozy spot with dim lighting and soft jazz playing in the background. She scanned the room and soon saw him sitting at a table in the corner, his hands folded in front of him, looking relaxed but focused. As soon as he saw her, he smiled and waved her over. "Thank you for meeting with me," he said as she sat down, his voice warm. "I know this might feel a little strange, but I'm really glad you're here." She smiled nervously, feeling like she was out of her element. "I'm glad to be here. I just don't know what I'm doing." He chuckled. "I think that's the point. You don't have to know everything. That's what this is about, figuring things out as we go." They talked for a while about their backgrounds, their experiences with music, and what had brought them to that moment. She told him about how she had taught herself to play, about the hours she spent at home experimenting with different pieces and trying to teach herself how to play by ear. It wasn't the traditional way, but it was the only way she had ever known. "I think that's amazing," he said after she finished. "Most people go through formal training, but there's something raw and real about learning on your own, by just feeling the music. It's something that can't be taught." His words made her feel more at ease. Maybe she wasn't so out of place after all. He wasn't expecting her to be some kind of polished professional. He was seeing her for who she was, a musician, even if she didn't fit the traditional mold. As the conversation continued, he asked her if she would be willing to perform again, but this time in a more controlled setting. He wanted to help her develop her skills, refine her technique, and introduce her to more advanced pieces of music. The thought of performing again made her nervous, but she couldn't deny the thrill that came with the idea. Maybe it was time to stop hiding, to stop thinking she wasn't good enough. Maybe it was time to see where this path could take her. "I'd like to give it a try," she said, her voice a little shaky but determined. "I don't know if I'm ready, but I want to learn. I want to see where this can go." He smiled, and for the first time she saw a sense of approval in his eyes. "That's all I need to hear. We'll take it slow. No pressure. We'll just see where the music leads." Over the next few weeks, their meetings became more frequent. They worked together on different pieces, some familiar and some new to her. He taught her things she had never known, about technique, about expression, about finding the story in the music. It was challenging, but it was also thrilling. Each practice session felt like a small step toward something greater. With each passing day, her confidence grew. She started to see herself not just as someone who played for herself in the quiet of her room, but as someone who had the ability to share her music with the world. And that thought, scary as it was, began to excite her. But despite the progress she was making, doubt still lingered. She wasn't sure if she was really cut out for this life. The idea of performing in front of others still terrified her. What if she wasn't good enough? What if she failed? But with the pianist's encouragement, those doubts slowly began to fade. He believed in her, and that belief made all the difference. She still had a long way to go, but for the first time she felt like she was on the right path. As the weeks went on, she started to realize something. She was no longer playing just for herself. She was playing for the audience, for the connection that music could create between people. It wasn't about being perfect anymore. It was about being real. And that, she realized, was more than enough. Weeks turned into months, and the woman found herself becoming more and more comfortable in her new routine. She was no longer just someone who played for herself in the quiet of her room. Now, she was stepping into the world of music with an openness she had never thought possible. The pianist had helped her navigate this new territory, teaching her more than just how to play the piano. He had taught her how to truly express herself through music. Each session they had was filled with both challenges and breakthroughs. There were days when she felt discouraged, when the music didn't come out the way she imagined it, or when her nerves got the best of her. But the pianist was always there, offering encouragement, reminding her that it was okay to stumble, that every mistake was part of the journey. "You can't rush this process," he often told her. "The most beautiful things take time," and so she kept going. She practiced more than ever before, but it didn't feel like a chore. There was something deeply fulfilling about it. As she played, she felt herself growing, not just as a musician, but as a person. She was learning to trust herself, to let go of the fear that had always held her back. The more she played, the more she realized that the music wasn't something to be feared. It was something to be embraced. One day, as they were working on a new piece, the pianist gave her a challenge. "I think you're ready," he said, looking at her thoughtfully. "I want you to perform in front of a small audience." The words hit her like a bolt of lightning. Her heart skipped a beat and her hands trembled slightly. Perform in front of an audience? She had never imagined doing that, let alone so soon. She had barely started to feel comfortable in the practice room, let alone standing in front of others. "I don't know if I can do that," she said, her voice shaky. "What if I mess up?" He smiled gently. "It's not about being perfect. It's about sharing something real, and I think you're ready to do that. Just trust yourself. The audience will connect with you no matter what." She wanted to argue, to tell him that she wasn't ready, but a small part of her knew that this was the next step. This was the challenge she needed to face, the one that would push her out of her comfort zone and force her to confront her fears head-on. If she wanted to move forward, she had to trust him and trust herself. "I'll try," she said, though she couldn't hide the nerves in her voice. "Good," he said, his tone encouraging. "We'll make it a low-key event, just a small gathering of friends, people who are supportive and will understand. No pressure." The idea of performing in front of even a small group made her stomach flip, but there was also a part of her that was excited. This was her chance to truly step into the person she was becoming. She couldn't hide behind her fear forever. It was time to share her music with the world, even if it was just a few people to start. The days leading up to the performance were a whirlwind. She practiced more than ever, pouring everything she had into the music. She worked on the piece the pianist had chosen, but more than that, she worked on herself. She had to remind herself that it was okay to be nervous. It was okay to not be perfect. The point was to play from her heart, to let the music flow through her without fear. The night of the performance arrived, and she was a bundle of nerves. The small venue was intimate with soft lighting and an audience that felt like a sea of faces staring at her. Her hands were clammy and she could feel her heart racing in her chest. The pianist stood nearby, giving her an encouraging nod before stepping off to the side. "You've got this," he whispered, his voice full of confidence. She nodded, though her stomach twisted. The moment she walked on stage, the lights seemed blinding, and the audience's silence felt like an ocean of expectation. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, and walked to the piano. Her fingers brushed the keys before she sat down, and she closed her eyes for a moment, focusing on the sound of her breath. The nervousness was still there, but it was slowly being replaced by something else. A quiet determination. She started playing. At first, her fingers were stiff, hesitant, but as the music filled the room, something shifted. The more she played, the more the fear melted away. It wasn't a perfect performance. There were moments when the notes didn't sound quite right, when her fingers stumbled. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that she was playing. She was sharing herself with the audience, and they were listening. They weren't judging. They were feeling the music just as she was. For the first time, she felt completely in the moment. It wasn't about being flawless, it was about being real. She let the music flow through her, allowing herself to feel the emotion behind each note. She didn't have to think about the next chord or the perfect rhythm. She just played. And as she did, she felt a connection with the audience. They were no longer strangers. They were part of something bigger, something shared through the music. When she finished, the room was silent for a heartbeat. Then slowly the applause began. It was soft at first, then louder as the audience realized what they had witnessed. The woman's heart raced as she looked out at the crowd.
She had done it.
She had stepped out of her comfort zone and played in front of people, and it wasn't the disaster she had feared. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. The pianist came up to her as the applause continued. "You were amazing," he said, his voice full of pride. She couldn't help but smile, a mixture of relief and joy flooding through her. "I can't believe I did it," she said, still trying to process everything that had just happened. "You didn't just do it," he replied. "You shared something special. That's what matters." As they left the stage, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders. It wasn't just the fear of performing in front of others that had held her back. It had been the fear of not being good enough. But now, for the first time, she understood that it wasn't about being perfect. It was about being true to herself. She didn't have to be flawless. She just had to be real. The night was a turning point for her. She had done something she never thought possible, and in doing so, she had taken a step toward becoming the person she wanted to be. The world of music was no longer a distant dream. It was something she was a part of, something she could create. She didn't know where this path would lead, but for the first time she was excited to find out. As the evening ended and the last guests began to leave, she found herself standing with the pianist, smiling as they both reflected on the night. "You did great," he said again, his voice full of warmth. "I'm proud of you," she smiled back, her heart full. "Thank you. I never thought I could do something like this." "You can do anything," he said with a grin. "This is just the beginning." And as she left the venue that night, she couldn't help but agree. It was just the beginning. The journey was far from over, but she was ready for whatever came next. In the months that followed, the woman's life began to change in ways she had never imagined. The performance, small as it had been, had opened a door that she hadn't even known existed. She continued to work with the pianist, honing her skills, pushing herself beyond what she thought were her limits. Each practice session felt like a step forward. Each lesson brought new insights. She was growing, not just as a musician but as a person. The pianist had become more than just a mentor to her. He had become a guide, someone who saw her potential when she could barely see it in herself. He had always believed in her, even when she doubted herself. And as their sessions continued, she started to believe in herself too. Her playing improved, but it wasn't just about hitting the right notes. It was about the emotion she could now bring to her music, the depth she could convey with each chord. She had discovered that music wasn't just something to be played, it was something to be felt. One day, After a particularly challenging practice, the pianist turned to her and said, "You're ready for something bigger now." She blinked, surprised. "What do you mean?" He smiled, the same warm, encouraging smile he always gave her. "I think it's time for you to perform again, but this time it's going to be different. Bigger." Her heart skipped a beat. "Bigger? What do you mean?" "I want you to perform in front of a larger audience, something with more people, more energy, more everything." "I believe you're ready for it." Her stomach churned. She had come a long way since that first performance, but the thought of standing in front of a crowd that was much larger, a crowd with more expectations, made her nervous all over again. "I don't know if I can handle that." "You can," he said simply. "We'll prepare, of course. But I believe you've reached a point where this is the next step for you. Trust me." She wasn't sure if she was ready. There was still so much fear inside her, so much uncertainty, but she also knew that the only way to truly grow was to keep challenging herself. And this was a challenge. The idea of performing in front of a bigger audience terrified her. But she couldn't deny the part of her that was excited to take the leap. "I'll do it," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do it," the pianist smiled. "I knew you would." Over the next few weeks, they worked tirelessly. The venue was much larger this time, a small concert hall with a few hundred seats. She had been invited to perform at a music festival, a celebration of local talent. It wasn't a huge stage, but it was a big step up from the intimate performance she had done before. There would be people she didn't know, strangers watching her play. The thought of it made her stomach twist, but she knew this was her chance to prove something to herself. She practiced every day, refining her technique, learning new pieces, and preparing herself mentally for what was to come. The pianist was always there, guiding her, pushing her, reminding her that she didn't have to be perfect. She just had to be herself. The night of the performance arrived, and she could feel the weight of it all. She was nervous, but there was also something else, a sense of anticipation, of excitement. This was it. This was the moment she had been working toward. And even though she felt like she might crumble under the pressure, she knew she had come too far to turn back now. She arrived at the venue early, giving herself plenty of time to get used to the space. The concert hall was much bigger than the small venue where she had performed before. There was a grand piano on the stage, the same kind she had practiced on, but the setting felt different. It was more formal, the atmosphere thick with expectation. She stood at the edge of the stage, watching as the final touches were made to the room. The seats were filling up, and she could hear the murmur of voices from the audience. It felt surreal. She was about to play for a crowd of strangers. Her hands were clammy. Her heart was racing, and her mind was full of doubts. What if she messed up? What if they didn't like her music? What if she froze up on stage? These thoughts swirled around her head, making it harder to focus. But then she remembered something the pianist had told her. Don't think about the audience. Think about the music. Focus on what you feel, not what you fear. Taking a deep breath, she walked to the piano and sat down. The moment her fingers touched the keys, everything else seemed to fade away. The noise of the audience, the pressure of the performance, it all disappeared, and for the first time in a long time, she felt completely at peace. She wasn't thinking about how nervous she was or how many people were watching her. She was just playing, and that was enough. The music flowed from her hands, the notes filling the room. She had worked hard to prepare, and now she let the music speak for itself. As she played, she felt the emotion of each piece, the story behind each note. She was no longer afraid of making mistakes because she knew that mistakes were just part of the process. What mattered was that she was there, that she was sharing her music with the world. The audience was silent as she played, their attention focused entirely on her. There was no laughter, no whispers, just the sound of her music filling the air. For the first time, she wasn't playing for herself. She was playing for them, and somehow that made all the difference. When she finished, there was a brief moment of silence before the applause started. It wasn't the overwhelming roar of applause she had imagined. It was quieter, more thoughtful, as if the audience was processing what they had just witnessed. She looked up, her heart still racing, and saw their faces, some of them nodding, some of them smiling. They weren't just applauding her. They were applauding the connection she had created with them. The pianist was in the front row, smiling proudly. She had done it. She had faced her fear, stepped out of her comfort zone, and shared something real with the world. And it had been enough. Backstage, after the performance, she felt a wave of relief wash over her. The nerves that had gripped her before had disappeared, and in their place was a deep sense of pride. She had done something that once seemed impossible, and now it didn't seem so scary anymore. She had proved to herself that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. When the pianist found her backstage, he wrapped her in a hug. "You were amazing," he said. "I knew you had it in you," she laughed, feeling the joy of the moment flood through her. "I can't believe I did it," she said, her voice filled with awe. "You didn't just do it," he said. "You owned it. You shared your soul with that audience, and that's what makes a true performer." The rest of the evening was a blur. The audience had given her a standing ovation, and she had spent the rest of the night mingling with other musicians and guests, receiving compliments and kind words. But through it all, there was a quiet sense of accomplishment that filled her from the inside out. She had done something she once thought was beyond her reach. She had stood on that stage, vulnerable and real, and she had given it everything she had. As she left the venue that night, walking into the cool night air, she realized something important. This wasn't just about music. It was about life. The fear, the doubts, the insecurities, they were all part of the journey. But they didn't have to hold her back. She didn't have to wait for the perfect moment to do something. She just had to take the first step, trust herself, and see where it took her. And as she walked down the street, the sound of the piano still echoing in her mind, she knew that this was just the beginning. The world was full of possibilities, and she was ready to embrace them all.